Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our friends and colleagues who have joined us here today. My name is Jennifer Lenhart, and I am the Global Lead for Cities at WWF, where we have a flagship program working with cities to do their data reporting called the One Planet City Challenge to see where cities are aligned on the Paris Agreement, including data related to mitigation and adaptation. And thereafter, we're working with cities also on topics including urban food systems and nature-based solutions, which is why I'm here with you today. So this webinar, hosted by the GPSC, so thank you so much for hosting us, is about the role of nature-based solutions for cooling in our cities. And today's webinar is coming at an incredibly urgent time. We just finished the climate conference in Glasgow. 2020 was the hottest year on record so far, and heat in our cities is rising at 2 times the global average. As such, well-designed nature-based solutions in our cities have a significant role to help cool our cities in a sustainable and equitable fashion, as well as bringing multiple co-benefits, whether it be for health, environment, job opportunities, etc. Investing in urban nature can help to counter the urban heat island effect and also to build more resilient cities. This webinar will focus on highlighting the benefits of many of those nature-based solutions, and it is co-hosted by WWF and UNEP, among other partners, and really frames the conversation looking at the role of nature-based solutions for cooling. I should also note a very important event happened at the climate conference, which was the launch of the Beating the Heat, a sustainable cooling handbook for cities, where our friends at RMI have also played a rather significant role. And this great publication, which we will also share within the chat in a bit later, was put together by the Cool Coalition, which brings together 120 governments, industry, academia, and civil society. This particular webinar has been put together by a global community of best practice, or global community looking for best practices from cities, academia, and technology to really see the role of nature in cooling our cities. So with those few words, I am very excited to share with you that we have a fantastic list of speakers. I'm not going to list them all because they are all on the program online, so we will make sure that that gets added to the chat. They have some very impressive biographies, so I'll let you read up on them a little bit later. But first and foremost, I'd like to introduce you to our keynote, which is Kathy Bogman McLeod, who is the director for the Adrian Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center, rather impressive organization at the Atlantic Council. And I also want to add an additional congratulations to her, because she's not only serving as a director at this Resilience Center, but also is been newly appointed as a climate specialist at the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, National Advisory Council. She is the first ever climate specialist at FEMA. So, Kathy, over to you to talk about the importance of addressing extreme heat, and certainly something that governments, as your new appointment shows, are taking increasingly seriously, and also the role of nature in this regard.
You bet. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for having me. It's been quite a ride post-COP, and we got to meet in person for the first time, which was really nice, in the Resilience Hub, which was a turning point for the resilience and climate adaptation agenda, which could be another webinar altogether. But a lot of things didn't happen in Glasgow, but one thing that did happen is that the resilience and climate adaptation agenda and the finance to go with it are having its day in the sun, pardon the pun. It's it's about heat. So there's optimism while some pretty gritty realism about what we're facing. And I think the key thing today, I want to talk about the nature part and the journey of biodiversity protection and conservation, and bringing conservation into the city and what that means, and this idea of the ecosystem service. And there's a again, 10 webinars we could do. And so I just have 6 minutes and may have eaten up one already, but I really want to underscore that piece of it, because that's the kicker. This isn't a webinar about capital, but capital is essential, and not just capital because we know it's there. It's how we create the pipeline of projects that are aggregated to the size we need to be able to attract $100 million into nature-based or green gray solutions for heat, but for so many climate impacts. I also want to thank our partners at the UN Environment Program, the Cool Coalition, World Wildlife Fund, Rocky Mountain Institute. We're glad to be a partner in helping disseminate this important guide for cooling cities, and more on that later. As Jennifer said, I'm the director of the Adrian Arch Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council. Our mission is to build the human capacity for resilience in the face of climate change. And we've set a goal of reaching 1 billion people with resilient solutions by 2030. And we count that those people resilient when we can say that we can prove they have new information, new skills, or a layer of protection over them, which could be finance, it could be risk transfer, that helps them better prepare for, withstand, and recover from the shocks and stresses driven by climate change. So I want to talk about conservation for just a minute and then switch to heat. So, my first conservation job, I was 22 and I worked for the State Environment Agency, and I was hired to make a map of degraded public lands for a mitigation bank. And the GPS that we used back then was a giant yellow backpack with an antenna that stuck off the back that was connecting with the satellites with a giant handheld piece that went with it. And that was my first foray into conservation. And I went all over the state of Florida in all the different, it's 15 hours by car from Pensacola to Key West, just to give you a sense of the distance, but also the different ecosystems, and got steeped in the ecosystems and how they function and how they don't function when they're damaged. And went from there to the Trust for Public Land, and it's a US-based NGO focused on conservation in communities in urban and suburban areas. And so beginning to make my way into the city, as they say. And the focus there was to create public funding sources, legislation, campaigns for money and programs to permanently protect land and water. The climate movement had not made it into mainstream state, and I would even say federal politics. I think that feel safe in saying that. But the awareness of the urban agenda was coming, and the source of revenue for these programs is coming from urban areas, particularly in the public setting, of course. And so after I worked for 2+ years for the chief financial officer of the state of Florida and got steeped in risk and risk management and risk transfer and the politics of insurance, I moved to DC and became the managing director for climate risk and finance. And the goal of that program and my team there was to mainstream natural infrastructure. Like I was coastal systems, but this is also for forests and all nature-based water included, but oyster reefs, coral reefs, mangroves, temperate wetlands, to protect coastlines by absorbing storm surge and breaking waves. And so you can see, and there's some great literature to go with this, to see the change in our thinking about how conservation went from biodiversity and it's beautiful and we feel good when we're in nature, to it has these essential benefits and we can begin to monetize them. And so part of the focus at the Nature Conservancy was to figure out, how do we create some new and creative funding sources and products. And so coming from Florida, where we were looking at all of the insurance issues and how risk and risk transfer work, we looked at, and working with Swiss Re, how can we create an insurance product on this coral reef in Mexico that's protecting by breaking waves, a $10 billion tourism industry. And so we created the first parametric insurance policy on that coral reef based on its protection. And so it opened up a door of different ways that we can use risk and risk transfer on nature and how nature can provide these services, and then who's benefiting from that service and create the relationship, the financial relationship of the beneficiary. So the policy paid out for the first time during 2020 for Hurricane Delta, and it's still there. It's being replicated in other places, but I left the Nature Conservancy to go to Bank of America, and I spent some time there on the first Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure report for the bank. And that is looking at the physical risks of climate change and the transition risks and more, but really deeply into the financial side of the risks of climate and how to measure them, and then what are the strategies to reduce them, and the products and financial strategies to transfer the risk so that you yourself are not holding it and the market can hold it. So that's another webinar altogether. But I do love insurance. So if anyone else out there loves insurance, please send me a note, because I think it's such a powerful tool. We haven't quite cracked it all the way, but we will. So let me turn to heat. So I left the bank, I came to the Atlantic Council, and we launched the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. If I say it 3 times, you all will remember it, I know. We call it Arsht Rock for short. I think that's easier for everybody. And we're focused on nature-based solutions here, but we're focused on heat. And I don't want to spend too much time on all the stats, but it's really stunning that heat is killing more people than any other climate-driven hazard in the world, definitely in the US. And we worked with Vivid Economics, and we, with modeled and current data, found just in one dimension alone that heat is costing the US economy $100 billion in 2020. That'll go to $200 billion in 2030, and then $500 billion in 2050. And that's just one dimension. That's not, business interruption, mortality, any of the other ways, infrastructure that heat is impacting our cities. And we will be rolling out those studies for 10 global cities in the next 6 months. And so more on that. But the key thing is that our center is focused on protecting lives and livelihoods from heat. And we launched a global alliance, the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, to combat the silent killer. We are really focused on how do we bring the most efficient, the urgency just couldn't be greater. And so what we are doing with this alliance, we're creating chief heat officers. And we've done that in Miami and Athens and Freetown, Sierra Leone, and more to come. And that's to bring somebody that wakes up every day thinking about heat. We also have heat seasons that were being declared. We have naming and categorization of heat waves. But the key thing here is that nature is the most powerful, cost-effective tool, and we need to refine which species go where, prevent maladaptation, create the capital flows that we need. But we have the policy, we have the science, we have the money. We need to put ourselves together with humility and scale nature to protect people from this deadly risk. And Jennifer, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. There's so much more. It's a very exciting topic because we can do this. And thanks so much. I look forward to working with everyone to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kathy. It was fun to kind of get the whole story, your kind of personal journey, but also strong conviction. And, putting those financial numbers, 100 billion in 2020 and only growing up. But I also like that you talked about, the importance of feeling good in nature, including in our cities. So it's really all of this. So it's, addressing heat because it's urgent. Yes. It saves lives, but it also creates much more beautiful cities. So thank you so much for those very inspiring words to open us up.
You bet.
And speaking of other inspiring city examples, we will now turn to the beautiful city of Madrid, I should say, as well as in Guangzhou in China. So we will have Santiago Saura, who is a counselor from the city of Madrid, and Zhuman Wang, who is a senior urban specialist with the GPSC at the World Bank. So I will ask some brief questions to both of you before we move on to the next panel. And so just to start out, to understand the work that you're doing, so allowing you to introduce yourself and how the work that you're doing is developing on nature-based solutions for cooling. And so to Councillor Santiago Saura, on Madrid's plans for using nature-based solutions to reduce extreme heat to cool the city. Could you clarify a little bit more what you're doing in the city of Madrid?
Sure, yes, a pleasure. Pleasure to join you today, to join all of you, and thanks for inviting the city of Madrid and myself to join this session. Of course, in Madrid, let's say that implementing nature-based solutions in our city is a top priority in the political agenda and in the city agenda of Madrid. And for this reason, we have developed a strategy, a renaturalization strategy that aims to adapt our city, but not the city, but also the citizens and even the biodiversity, the urban biodiversity, to climate change and to the rising temperatures that are already happening and will continue to increase in the next years and decades. No? So this strategy includes several different projects. Some of them are, let's say, citywide projects, and some others are more fine scale interventions at the neighborhood or even at the individual building scale. Starting from the broader scale, the flagship and largest project that we have in this strategy is the Metropolitan Forest. The Metropolitan Forest is a 75-kilometer long forest ring, a green corridor that will surround the entire city of Madrid and will be composed of native trees, native species only. So we plan to plant close to 500,000 trees and about 2,000 hectares of new forest in all around the city. But in addition to this new forest area that we will create, the aim is to connect green areas and forests areas that already exist in the city of Madrid, but that are currently, let's say, scattered or fragmented from each other. So we aim to provide a spatial and ecological connectivity by linking together all these areas, the existing and the new forest areas, in this form of a continuous corridor. In addition to, let's say, the green part and the planting part, we will also include green bridges or aqueducts over some of the main roads or motorways that are around the city. So we try to ensure the connectivity of the forest at both sides of these gray infrastructures with this green infrastructure. So this is also in Madrid a response to desertification, because desertification in the south of Europe is coming in the south of Madrid is also coming in, particularly in the southeast of the city. And this area of the southeast is where we will start the main developments of the Metropolitan Forest, where they have already started and will be concentrated in the next years. I have to say this is a large-scale project, as I said, has already started, but will be developed during the next 10 years. Together with this large-scale Metropolitan Forest, we have plans and ongoing projects also based on nature-based solutions, but more at the finer spatial scale in the city neighborhood fabric. And for example, one of these other important projects is consists in the expansion of urban agriculture projects in the city fabric. We will use many of about 300 vacant parcels in between building blocks with a total area of about 240 hectares. And in this project, which we call the Productive Neighborhoods Project, we will put urban agriculture projects, and we call it productive because it has several aims, not just environmental, but also economic and social. So we will increase vegetation cover, etc. We will also reduce carbon footprint of transport because we will supply 0-kilometer food, proximity food, and we will also create employment and social activity linked to this organic food production and plant and flower production within these neighborhoods in the city. Other projects, just to conclude this first response, include the renewal of schoolyards with climate change adaptation and greening criteria, or creating greener pathways and locations in the city to improve, let's say, climate comfort in the streets and squares and public spaces and regenerate neighborhoods in this direction as well. And finally, it's also important to consider the regulatory side. We are also modifying city regulations, some of which were old and were not adapted, were not prepared, were not designed when we had these concerns on climate change and rising temperatures. We're modifying these regulations so that green roofs and green walls are considered in a more favorable way in the regulations when they are included in building projects or in house renovation projects. So we aim to promote that they are included more widely in the city, even in the initiative of private citizens or private companies developing these projects. So this is a overview of the efforts and strategy that Madrid is putting in place to cool down the city with the help of nature in the city.
Fantastic. I mean, Madrid is already a beautiful city, so I'm looking forward to come back and see all that you're up to. I like the big picture plans, but also the focus on connectivity between the existing nature areas. And I think, this webinar was also about tools, both technical tools as well as policy tools. And it's we can't forget the importance of modifying those regulations as you mentioned as well. So thank you so much, Councillor. And over to Human. So with your role within the World Bank, you've been supporting quite a lot of interesting efforts on urban cooling in Guangzhou as a case study in China. So could you share with us, I know you have some slides as well to visualize, but some of the project goals and how these relate to both tackling extreme heat, but also sustainable cooling?
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And when I heard what Santiago from Madrid just talked about, I have to say we are doing very, very similar things in the city of Guangzhou, not only in Guangzhou, and many other cities. In fact, many of our client cities are in China and also in other regions. So I'm very happy to use this opportunity to share some preliminary findings. So I do have a few slides. Let me quickly share with you. So let me see. Okay, great. So perhaps just to give you an overview that why we pilot nature-based passive solutions. Give our audience quick overview. What do we mean? What the urban cooling solutions normally in the two categories. One major category is use technology, of course, air conditioning, and we call active cooling solutions. So that has been widely utilized and absolutely important, but there are also very important other parts, exactly as Santiago from Madrid mentioned. What are the nature-based solutions? What are the passive solutions? And we feel that somehow that part of solution have not been given enough attentions. And so those solutions include the man-made, nature-based green and water features, and how you do the appropriate urban design, how you actually manage the wind flows, and how you manage the walls and roofings, and how to also create the surface that is more solar reflective. And so our studies also show that those are very important complementary measures to air conditioning or active space cooling, and could reduce energy demand by almost 20%. So that's where city the country, that's what we are trying to do in the city of Guangzhou. Guangzhou is in the southern part of China. It's a mega city with 15 million people, and the population is still increasing. So it's a subtropical, it's hot all year round, most of it, yeah. So, and then the city itself, of course, there's a major focus on old town regeneration, how to develop the old towns to accommodate more people and to make the old areas more livable. And then also how to do the new town development to accommodate increasing population. So our pilot, we have three major pilots. The first is to pilot the traditional approach and to using the opportunity of regeneration, the city's regeneration to incorporate the cooling measures. And so, and then of course it's new town development, and we're trying to also incorporate new measures when they start still doing at the planning stage. And the third part is that what really the cooling effect and ecological services are wetland, for example, a natural urban asset will be able to provide to cities. So we did a modeling work to understand the value, including the economic value of the ecological services, including cooling. So the first part is about urban regeneration. So we look at the 3 levels. First, at the site level, to understand that how to create these cool alleys. And one thing is important, I'm sure the city of Madrid will agree with me. There are so many old buildings, and think about just 40 or 50 years ago, nobody really used air conditioning. I know in many Europeans still nobody use air conditioning. So, and our the traditional architecture, traditional design actually have taken that into account, that to create a cool valley, to allow wind flows. But just with the modern building, seems we all forgot about all the traditional approach. And that's where we will see that how to reintroduce the urban design, both at site level and building level. And we also look at the landscape, that how to incorporate the green and water features into this old neighborhood. And one thing is that our local colleagues in Guangzhou have, the architects have incorporated many of to recover all those traditional designs and the cool alleys and the roofing. So all this, in fact, will generate a lot of the cooling effects for the neighborhood. So that's one part we have done. And the second part is that as the city is increasing, so basically the city of Guangzhou expects 400,000 people each year to come into the city. So where to allocate the people? So there's a lot of new town development. So that's where it provides excellent opportunities for urban planners and for policymakers at this stage, that how very early on, to avoid all the mistakes that have been made before, to integrate the cooling options. And that, in fact, create also much livable conditions. And that includes that, again, I will come back again, I think not been given enough attention is wind flows. You will see that most of our high-rise buildings, they just build whatever that can, but it actually blocks the wind flows. That's quite important, and understand a city's wind flows, and to create, to allow the whole urban design to allow the wind flow is a very important consideration. And that's also important nature-based solutions to cool down the city. And of course, it's the same that we talk about water and green infrastructure and solar reflections, and also the building the typology. And then, so to also give the urban planners, policymakers have full understanding what are the natural assets, what are the ecological services they will be able to provide, and what exactly urban cooling effect will be provide. So we did this modeling using one of the large urban wetland, which is located in the heart of Guangzhou, is in the old part of the city. It's 11 square kilometers. In fact, it's quite massive. And to understand what the role of this wetland has achieved, everybody love it. It's nice for people to take a walk, a lot of health benefits, but we want to quantify. So we did 4 ecological services. First, about what are the urban cooling this wetland has played for that neighborhood. So that's first. And what's the climate mitigation? To what extent would be able to absorb carbon dioxide? In particular, the city of Guangzhou is also moving toward carbon neutrality. They would also understand what would be the options of the natural assets. And of course, the recreation exercise, what would be the value for the city, and in particular, because of COVID, also understand both the physical and mental health, those natural assets. So the idea is that all those natural urban assets provide a variety of ecological services. It's very important to quantify them, understand, and put a price to natural assets. We always hear that we put a price to carbon. It's important, but we also will say that how we can put a price, understand the economic value of those natural assets. When the decision has to be made between building a great infrastructure and keeps the natural asset, at least people would understand what if the natural assets or wetland has been converted into a great building, people would understand what has been lost. As a result, that was a careful decision. We hope that careful decision will be made to retain those natural assets. So we come out with a number of recommendations. The first, I just quickly highlight is about technical solutions. Those are very similar to Madrid and many other cities. And the wind flows, very, very important. And so that's I have this map. The city planners has identified 6 major wind flows across the cities. And then from those 6 wind flows, they actually also identify smaller wind flows all the way down to their neighborhood to understand that how when you do the buildings, and how to not block the wind flows, to allow you create those cool alleys. And then we have heard also from Madrid, also Jennifer, you also highlight the connectivity. It's very important because how you create the maximize the cooling effects. So they are doing a massive inventory to understand all the natural assets and then how to connect them. And then how you also use nature-based solutions to do the ecological restoration. So the idea is that we have all the green corridors and then and water infrastructures. You have so green and blue spaces. And that's where have a much better, a stronger, powerful role to help cities, to do these natural cooling cities. And the third, of course, the urban fabric. That's where I talk about the traditional approach to understand how you design the cities from the building, from the site, from the neighborhood to reshape the cities. And of course, the surface is always important. Avoid those kind of modern buildings using the solar reflective. So that being said, then the question is that also similar to what Madrid has done is that how to translate those recommendations into reality. So we look at 2 aspects. One is that how you support the planning from the spatial planning, to understand the much bigger picture, and all the way to the guideline, to the site designs. And one important conclusion has been drawn by the Guangzhou team, the urban planners there, is that yes, it's important to have guidelines, but the guidelines, you need to, what's the way to implement, enforce them? And it's because eventually the site is developed by the developers. And if you just have guidelines, they would maximize benefits. So it's important that when you do the, say, for example, auction out all those slots for the urban, for the developers, and that guidelines or space design should be, including the cooling consideration, should be part of the contract arrangement, because that's a way to enforce and implement the good technical solutions. And the third part, of course, how to finance it. In the end, we also did some analysis to understand by introducing those cooling in the old neighborhood, introduce only cooling measures. What are the cost implications? Because that's a rough calculation. But overall, I think the calculation is that if you do the $1 investment, the gain is much more, can be doubled. I think the nitty-gritty important question is that for the private sector, because that's eventually the private sector have to put forward there, is that how you share the benefits, right? Because the residents would gain from all those cooling measures incorporated into the design, but the developers do not necessarily benefit that. So there's a question that how you actually find a mechanism to share those the benefits and then share the financing. And that's not the easy solution. That's where we're still exploring, developing to say that how that would provide financial incentives for the developers and of course for the users to bring and to introduce the cooling measures. So finally, so those reports will come out very soon. So we have actually quite 4 reports from overview, the guidelines, and they really describe how we have done very, if anybody interested in the detailed design, and I've, once this report comes out, I highly recommend. It's very, very nice layout, how to introduce the urban fabrics to do it. And of course, also have a full technical report and to assessment, including the methodology and modeling work to understand the cooling effect as well as the economic value of the ecological services of the urban wetland. Finally, so this is a primarily done by the SMAP, as also the Global Plan for Sustainable Cities already online and carried out many of the solutions. So, as Madrid highlighted, as also we have piloted in Guangzhou. Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Xiumen, and it's very exciting, and yes, definitely take note of what has already been published and what is soon coming, because this is a lot of great experience coming out of Guangzhou. So we're going quickly on time as always. There's lots of exciting things to share, but we'll go back to Madrid to just talk a little bit about challenges and opportunities. I know there's, especially for cities that are new to this topic and wanting to really jump in terms of nature-based solutions. Councillor Santiago, can you share with us some of the challenges and opportunities that we've seen in Madrid, and how to overcome some of those challenges so other cities can learn from your great work there?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I would say that the challenges are mainly possibly three. The first is to have the involvement of all the citizens in these projects, but already from the beginning, even from the design phase. It's important that these projects are not just projects run by the environment or the urban planning department of the Madrid City Council, but that they, on the contrary, involve, of course, all areas of the Madrid City Council, but more broadly the entire city system, private companies, citizens associations, and individual citizens in the city are feeling involved, are having an influence in the designs of these projects. That's important. The second one is the need for long-term political support, because we can develop a strategy, we can start a project, but many of these projects, how we transform a city, this really needs continuity over time. This will take a significant number of years, and it should span political mandates and resist also not just climate change, but also political cycles. No? So for that, it's important to ensure this political support. And in particular in Madrid, we submitted several of these projects I mentioned in my previous answer to the plenary of the Madrid City Council, to the consideration of all the political groups that are represented in the Madrid City Council, but both government and opposition groups. And we finally were able to agree by unanimity on different measures, but among them, several measures on, let's say, renaturalization or nature-based solutions in the city, which will ensure this long-term continuity and commitment for this project, which is essential. And then another challenge, I think, is funding, because money matters also in this case. Or at least how much money, how much resources we can put, and we can have also influence the scale and the speed of transformation in this direction. First of all, in Madrid, we want to say that this, for example, in particular with this large-scale metropolitan forest, we want to invest in a green infrastructure that is low cost in implementation and in maintenance, but because we want it to be as natural as possible. This is not, let's say, a garden. This is a natural forest. We want something that is self-sustained, that has low water requirements within a reasonable range, and is composed by these native species I was mentioning before that are adapted to current, but also to the future climate change that we know we are going to have in a few decades. So that's important. In addition to this, we need to finance these projects. And there are challenges, but there are opportunities as well. Of course, we have to make a buffer. We are making an effort with the municipal budget, but we also have opportunities, for example, like European funding. The European recovery funds from the Next Generation funds in Europe are clearly supporting these kind of projects in Madrid and in other cities. We also have investment opportunities from the European Investment Bank or from other investors. And also at the more, let's say, local scale of private companies in Spain or in Madrid, we are working in collaboration, public-private collaboration, so that these companies, through the corporate social responsibility, are putting funds to develop these projects. And also they have the chance to, let's say, to offset their emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, by planting trees in these projects we have in Madrid, such as the Metropolitan Forest. And also importantly, because the urban design comes to a phase where it needs to be developed together with private companies and investors, we have to, with developers, we are shaping their obligations. So which part of the land they can use for housing, and which part of the land they need to set aside for the greening and for the Metropolitan Forest. And we are, let's say, combining the benefits they will get through housing with the obligations they will have to fund the development of these nature-based solutions in the city scale, in the new urban development. So all this has to be put in the same process and make it happen already from the beginning, from the design phase already. And then the opportunities, there are many others as well, as Sherman was saying before. There are multiple benefits and synergies with other demands in the cities. Is, of course, these cooling projects are, of course, adapting to climate change, are sequestering carbon, but also they are providing contact with nature, and they are providing high quality outdoor space in proximity with the neighborhoods, in proximity with the houses, no? And this has been shown to be very important, even more so through the pandemic, no? This need to improve the health and the mental and physical well-being of citizens, to have these opportunities for outdoor recreation in proximity to the neighborhoods, and also what it involves in terms of improving the visual appeal and the quality of the neighborhoods, especially in some of the neighborhoods which are, let's say, more vulnerable or are lower income neighborhoods. These projects can bring in significant regeneration and improvement to the entire urban quality in the region. So that's also an important aspect, and we need to put all these pieces, economic, environmental, social, etc., together, so that we have more support and we put all the projects together to advance in this direction.
Absolutely fantastic. And I'm just going to quote you on a few of those things before we head over to the next panel. Citizen involvement, long-term political support, funding, 3 key things. And then you walked us around how you're addressing some of that. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to remind our audience, I've seen some questions coming in. And so also to our speakers, if you could please answer them directly in the chat box, that would be fantastic. And do so making sure that it goes to not just the panelists and the hosts, but also to everyone, so that everyone can see those questions and comments coming back. One final word before we move over on kind of an all hands on deck thinking. So what would be your call to action to really push this forward in 1 minute, or preferably less, in 30 seconds, to really see, we need governments, we need donors, we need stakeholders on board. Where do we start, and how do we give this the kind of the push for the next panel coming forward? First to you, Juman, and then to Santiago.
So maybe I just add one. I think it's quite important is that I completely agree with what Santiago has laid out. I think it's really just all the challenges facing. And one of the major institutional arrangements is that the urban cooling or heat island effects does not belong to any particular agency. So because it's multiple agencies, then how you find a way to coordinate, which agency will take the lead. And that's something is always unclear. And I think cities are still trying to figure out, and how I think would that how you bring that different stakeholders together. I think that's also, it's but on the other hand, with this issue getting more and more awareness, and the governments are more aware, so they are to organize task force and how to deal with this issue collectively, because it's a multi-stakeholders issues for everybody, and also Chair Yang. So I think that's something that I would probably just emphasize again. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Santiago, your final word.
Yes, thank you very much. I would say that we're talking about cities now, but we need to be engaged, of course, and coordinate with the regional and the national governments. We need, for example, from the ecological or territorial angle, we need to link with the broader set of protected areas and corridors that are surrounding the cities. We need to put all these linking together in a coherent network of protected and corridor network. And then we also need to make, as I said, a strong push for participatory approaches in the design of these projects. So we have to involve citizens, we have to involve kids in the planting, we have to involve universities in the design of the projects. We need to put all these pieces, all these actors in the city together working, and not thinking in a single project. We need to think in a portfolio of projects. So these projects should be viewed from the ecological, from the social, from the economic, from the climate change perspective, and with all those perspectives, bring together all the ideas and develop projects that are able to touch all these angles simultaneously. And this will be the best solution for cooling cities and for making them more sustainable and socially equitable in the future as well.
Absolutely. So I heard collaboration, integration, landscape approach. That's wonderful. And that fits very well with WWF's motto, which is together possible. So with that note, I'm going to thank our fantastic speakers and hand over to you, Kes.
Hello. Look, fantastic work on kicking off this this online event. And look, I mean, just like Jennifer summed up there, I mean, a really good start and foundation for our next discussions. My name is Kes McCormick, and I'm an associate professor at Lund University in Sweden. You might get from my accent, I'm from another part of the world entirely. That's Melbourne, Australia, which is deeply affected by a changing climate and needs to think about how it's going to adjust its cities to respond. But my background's in political science and environmental science, and I do a lot of work with nature-based solutions and innovation, sustainability in cities and so on, and even teach an online course on urban nature. But most importantly, I'm here today as a moderator for this second part of the event, which is actually focused on tools for cities to develop nature-based solutions for cooling. And I think this focus on tools is so very important because we need to move towards action very quickly. And I've got two guests here today, which is fantastic. We have Rashad Nanavati, who's the lead on urban transformation at RMI, or the Rocky Mountain Institute, a very famous organization with an amazing history. Welcome here today, Rashad. And we've also got Erica Ward, who's a senior policy advisor at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the United Kingdom. Just pretty close to that big event they hosted recently called COP26 on climate change and so on. Great to have you both here today. I'm going to dive into questions straight away to challenge you a little bit to tell us about tools and how we can think about taking action on nature-based solutions. So to the first question is to Erica. Erica, this is a tough question, but this is the foundational question, which is, how has extreme heat and rising cooling demand impacted cities, in your case, in the UK? And how is the national government responding to this challenge? And what role does green infrastructure play in responding to this challenge? Over to you, Erica.
Thanks very much, Kes. So the first thing I'd say about this is that while the United Kingdom is not a country famed for its warm weather, extreme heat is also really is a real big challenge here as well. So we've been experiencing more frequent heat waves that are affecting public health, for example, in 2018, 19 and 20. And this is all backed up by the UK's climate change risk assessment, which has identified extreme temperatures as an important future risk. Since it hasn't been an issue so much historically, this means our built environment and our infrastructure is not necessarily designed with higher temperatures in mind. So we see this as a crucial area for adaptation. In England, as environmental policy is a devolved matter in the rest of the UK, so we have a national adaptation programme for England, and this is updated every 5 years, with the current programme running to 2023. As part of this, we see green infrastructure, the network of green and blue spaces and other natural features, as we see this as an important element for adapting to extreme heat. This can include green roofs for moderating building temperatures, but also street trees to provide that crucial shading. So we are also keen to develop to promote green infrastructure for its multiple benefits. So we see that multi-functionality as crucial here. This ranges from biodiversity, quality of life, improvements to water quality and to natural flood management as well. So really it's a win-win situation when well designed. So local government here plays a crucial part in planning for delivering and maintaining green infrastructure. So we in central government and in DEFRA, one of our crucial roles is to ensure that local authorities have the tools they need in order to do this. With this in mind, we are developing a green infrastructure framework for England. This will help local areas plan and deliver good green infrastructure. This framework is being developed with Natural England, the government's advisor for the natural environment in England, as well as a range of other stakeholders. And we've been testing it with local authorities and local areas. So what is the framework? It comprises a series of products, including data and best practice guidance and standards. It's a voluntary framework for local authorities to adopt, and it's underpinned by a set of principles of good green infrastructure. And excitingly, we're about to launch a beta version of some of the products of the framework on the 7th of December, in fact, with the full launch next year.
Well, look, it sounds very exciting. I mean, you raised many points there, which are pretty interesting, but I just follow up on one. I think that one of the points that you made about the co-benefits associated with nature-based solutions, and this is so important to highlight, which has been highlighted several times here already, but just about they provide multiple benefits, and we need to capture that value, that full value, to be able to invest in them. And then just the other point about the multi-level governance, about the role of national governments, national agencies to facilitate bottom-up efforts and local governments. I think that's, yeah, it's fantastic work going on. So look, we're going to jump around a bit now. I'm going to jump to Rashad now. Look, Rashad, in the framework of the Cool Coalition, which I really think is a fantastic name, but in the framework of the Cool Coalition, RMI has developed a new tool for cities to take on the cooling challenge and develop comprehensive strategies against, let's say, extreme heat. Look, can you just tell us a little bit more about the handbook and how it can help cities develop strategies that include nature-based solutions?
Sure, Kes. First, I'd want to acknowledge that it wasn't just RMI. It was truly a full Cool Coalition effort. And on this topic in particular, we owe actually a ton to the Cool Coalition's Nature-Based Solutions Working Group. I think there's something like 50 members of it, led by Jennifer. So we started work on this handbook, recognizing that there were great resources sort of scattered all across the internet, including the World Bank's reports on both passive and mechanical cooling, one of which Zhuman flashed up there, city-specific resources from Spain to Singapore to Australia, urban planning guides, a whole bunch of academic literature. And one of the things we wanted to do was gather all the most useful, practitioner-focused information in one place and organize it in a way that makes it easy for practitioners to navigate quickly to the information that they need or want most. So one key feature of the report is the guidance we offer on what to do when. And at the end of each section, we provide two things. One, a list of no regret moves. So interventions, relatively low cost interventions that make sense in almost all contexts at almost any point in time. I think too often we get kind of caught up in doing really, really detailed analysis and diagnostic, and we don't have that luxury of time in the context of a climate crisis. Second, again, we have these simple tables at the end of each section that list the more ambitious systemic actions that need to be timed with key trigger points, as we refer to them. Things like major infrastructure investments, development activity, urban planning exercises, updates to codes and zoning regulation. Our other big objective with this effort was to emphasize the importance of a really comprehensive approach, an approach that includes and emphasizes nature-based solutions. Unfortunately, when most people think of cooling, they think of air conditioning. That's our standard default adaptive response to heat. And I like to tell an anecdote of Lee Kuan Yew, who a few years before he died was asked about the secret of Singapore's success. And the first thing he highlighted was the importance of tolerance among the different ethnic groups in Singapore. The second thing was air conditioning. There are a couple of big problems with air conditioning, unfortunately. One, it's deeply destructive to the planet, and it's especially problematic in urban environments. You know, under a business as usual trajectory, we're going to need something like 6,200 annual additional terawatt hours of electricity just for space cooling. And to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of the entire electricity consumption of the US, Japan, and Germany combined today. The second problem is that not everyone can afford it or gain access to it, right? India's outdoor labor force, to cite just one example, you're talking about farmers, construction workers, laborers, street vendors, comprises 400 million people. So that's the rationale for a comprehensive approach. We can't just air condition our way out of this problem. And nature-based solutions are critical because they address both of these challenges. They reduce the air conditioning requirements in building energy loads, and they make a city much, much more livable or even survivable for people who don't have the luxury to just retreat into air-conditioned spaces.
Oh, look, so many good points. I mean, I think your original point about no regrets, I mean, this just relates to everything on sustainable development. I think it's such an important policy and action approach, is to take these actions or tasks that really have no regrets associated with them. And just going back to your further point about collaboration, it's been mentioned several times. It is worth highlighting that collaboration and partnerships is one of the 17 sustainable development goals. And there's a reason why it is there. And that's just because that partnerships and these types of collaborations are so fundamental. I've also been in Singapore, and I can say that air conditioning is pretty fantastic in Singapore, but how they provide it and so on is very, very important to think about. Look, thanks a lot. I'm going to jump back over to Erica with another question. Look, Erica, a question for you. I mean, what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities for cities in the UK and abroad to design and implement nature-based solutions for cooling? And just going back to the tools and again, and approaches that you talked a little bit about already, I mean, how are these going to really take off in these cities?
Great, really good question. So one of our key challenges is that there's a variable picture in England in terms of the existing provision of green infrastructure. So some places have plenty, other places really don't. And also in the capacity of local areas to plan and deliver green infrastructure. We see some areas doing some really exciting things, but we really want to make sure that all local areas are equipped to use green infrastructure to meet the needs and challenges of the area. So the green infrastructure framework that I mentioned is intended to help with this. It should support the greening of towns and cities and meet so local and help local authority areas to meet the requirements of national policy to consider green infrastructure in local plans and in new development. So one of the key products we are launching next week is a publicly accessible England-wide mapping database for green infrastructure. This will show where green infrastructure assets are and how accessible they are to different communities. We are also providing mapped analysis showing socioeconomic data, so the range of socioeconomic data layers that you can click on and off. It's quite an interactive tool, and it shows you can see where deprivation and access map alongside each other, so to help to plan for green infrastructure. So there's a whole wealth of data on there, but of particular relevance to coolness perhaps is the greenness grid. We have mapped grids of 250 meters square across England, which show the percentage of natural and artificial surfaces. This will help local areas identify where they could most benefit from additional greening, where there is little greenness at the moment. So yeah, we're hoping that we will build on this resource to add new layers of analysis and to help with the strategic planning of green infrastructure, and build on this to include a whole wealth of data on ecosystem services and including urban cooling. I mentioned we're launching the green infrastructure framework fully next year. We also have a few other products that of interest. One of these are green infrastructure standards. These will be voluntary standards but there'll be a core menu of different standards that local areas can choose, and that will help in local planning. Some of these will be area wide, but some will be standards that local authorities can choose to require developers to follow. So we're very excited about launching that next year. We also have a green infrastructure design guide. So yeah, lots happening in this space.
Yeah, no, there really is a lot happening. I mean, that mapping exercise, I think, yeah, sounds like a great resource, and I think very, very valuable to have this kind of access to data and so on. And like the point that you raised here, that different cities and communities have very different starting points when we're talking about nature-based solutions. And even within cities, we have a very uneven distribution of green space and nature-based solutions. And we need to recognize that. And there's a lot of justice issues involved in these kinds of discussions. So I think that this type of work is so valuable to taking action which will actually result in the kinds of positive impacts we want to see. No, it's extremely interesting. Rashad, can I jump back to you just in your kind of experiences and the analysis that RMI are doing? I mean, how can different sectors, we talked about this a little bit already, but public, private, financial, come together to enable a transition to sustainable cooling approaches and create what we might call heat resilient cities, preparing for a different future, I think?
Yeah. So there's a lot of very, very specific things that we could talk about, and I think actually Councillor Saura and Erica and Schumann have done a great job of highlighting some of them. So I'll maybe just focus on three broad themes, also which all of you have actually touched upon. One is that the impact of these interventions is just massively underappreciated. And because of that, we are not dedicating nearly enough resources or planning effort to nature-based solutions in an urban context. Two, we need to think about nature-based solutions broadly and systemically. And by systemically, I mean, think about how nature in cities interacts with our buildings, our transportation systems, our infrastructure. And three, this is what you just were talking about, Kes. At the moment, nature in cities delivers disproportionate benefits to the wealthiest people, but it can and obviously should be the opposite. So if we care about equity and environmental justice, nature-based solutions are essentially one of our most powerful tools. So I'll say a bit more on each of those themes. So when we were looking into the case studies for this handbook, we were really struck by the impact of some of these interventions. Let's just take one pretty well-known urban revitalization project as an example. This is the Chongcheon stream in Seoul. It was covered by an elevated roadway. Now it's this mixed-use corridor full of sort of blue and green space used by pedestrians and cyclists. That corridor is now more than 3.5 degrees Celsius cooler than a parallel road that lies just a few blocks away. In the US, we learned that investing $100 million annually, that was a figure I think that Kathy threw out in her keynote, investing $100 million annually in street trees could give 77 million people a 1 degree Celsius reduction in their heat exposure. That's $1.30 per person. The thing is, analyses like these are rare and they're difficult to do. The value of nature-based solutions is really, really big, but it's hard to quantify and it's even harder to monetize. And again, this is stuff that others have just talked about. So when a government, for example, retrofits its buildings or deploys rooftop solar or electrifies buses, all of these things can and invariably do save it money. But when it invests in parks or trees, the benefits are diffuse, right? They accrue to many, many others. They accrue to developers, property owners, insurance companies, the public at large. And that's great. But it also means that nature in cities is therefore chronically underfunded and inadequately planned. The Parks Department funding is often the first to be axed, right, in a fiscal crisis. When people are doing street redesigns, trees are viewed as the most sort of expendable part of them. And this is why institutions like the ones on this call, like the World Bank, have a really, really important role to play. We need funding and financing solutions that can shift the investment burden away from local governments, or at least share that burden. The second theme was, around the importance of thinking broadly and systemically. So in the simplest terms, you increase the proportion of blue and green space in a city, you reduce the urban heat island effect. And C40 has a rule of thumb that cities should dedicate about 30% of their area to green space, which is useful. There are obvious trade-offs with other land use, but too often we get that trade-off wrong. And it's really important to point out that nature in cities is not incompatible with density. But getting to that ideal takes planning and systems thinking. We need to think about the shape, size, and distribution of blue and green space. This is the spatial and ecological continuity that Councillor Saura was talking about in Madrid. You need to think about urban geometry. This is something that Schumann was talking about, things like building heights and street orientation to take advantage of prevailing winds. And we need to integrate nature into the built environment, something that all of our speakers have talked about, into our streets and into our buildings. And then the third major theme was, yes, around equity and environmental justice. So in the US, parks in low-income neighborhoods are on average a quarter of the size. They serve nearly 4 times as many people as parks in high-income neighborhoods. In Chile, the 5 wealthiest municipalities have 5 times more green space than the 5 poorest municipalities. And you see similar trends, unsurprisingly, in every single country you look. So those were the big 3, I think, themes that emerged from us from this exercise.
Oh, look, I mean, that's a fantastic overview. I think you've captured absolutely everything we need to be thinking about when we're talking about nature-based solutions in cities and so on. I think our relationship between cities and nature lies underneath all of what you just talked about. Look, we're actually, time flies when you're having fun and you're learning new things. We're at the end of this session. So I've just got a couple last questions for each of you, just if we can, just in a minute or so. If I just turn back to Erica, I mean, Erica, what plans does the UK government have to support cooling action in cities and beyond in the next year? And I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to answer that one. So good luck. Go for it.
So difficult to answer because of the range of things we're doing. But one of the things is tree-lined streets. So all new streets will be tree-lined in England. So that's a new thing. And then biodiversity net gain. This is so when when a new development happens, it'll have to be 10% more biodiverse than previously. So that's a new requirement of the Environment Act that's just passed through Parliament. Thanks, but loads of other things as well.
I mean, but just those 2 things, I mean, those are very practical actions. We are seeing something coming into actually planning policy and so on, in very direct ways. So I think those are great examples of a shifting in how we think about our cities and how we design them and so on. And Rashad, just over to you. I mean, one last thought, or, what's your hope for the use of the handbook and this kind of call to action where we're seeking to kind of respond to extreme heat with nature? What are you hoping for the future or hoping to see in terms of action and response?
Yeah, well, first, as this webinar suggests, right, that there's lots of momentum and action and development, but the same as climate action at large, while there is a lot of momentum, it's not enough. And commitments and plans are great, but what cities and what we routinely hear from cities is that they need practical nuts and bolts technical assistance and implementation support. So of the kind that Schumann and the World Bank team provided to Guangzhou. And that's certainly going to be our focus, RMI's focus over the next year. In terms of a call to action, I think mine would be pretty simple. One, I think reinforcing this message that thermal comfort is not a luxury. It's a matter of lives and livelihoods. And in the context of a rapidly warming world, we need to place it on the same plane as other basic human needs. And then relatedly, again, coming back to that point, we can't air condition our way out of this problem. If we try, we're going to completely blow past our global carbon budget. And that's why we need this comprehensive set of solutions. And that's why we've got to stop treating nature in cities as subordinate to human-made infrastructure. We think nothing of dropping 100 million on a road expansion. It really shouldn't be that hard to plant or protect 100 million trees. It's every bit as important as in an urban context as our transportation systems, our buildings, our power grid. arguably even more important, given that, to your point, they basically comprise infrastructure in the purest, most fundamental sense of the word. So really excited about moving. We put together the handbook because we felt that knowledge consolidation was important, but we've always viewed it as a first step. And what we're really, really keen on moving to is that technical assistance and implementation support for cities.
Thanks a lot to both of you for all the insights and all the inspiration here. I think it's we've packed a lot into this short session. I'm going to hand this over now to our final speaker, who I think I might be introducing, whose name is Martina Otto, who's the head of the cities unit at UNEP. It's over to you to wrap this up.
Well, thank you so much. And it's a pretty hard act to follow. It has been super rich and super exciting. So first of all, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to WWF Cities and the Coalition for this invite. And thanks to the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities for hosting this series on nature-based solutions for cities. And it is, I think, pretty clear it's a very hot topic. The action to counter extreme urban heat is as urgent as ever, and we're facing the heat already. Jennifer mentioned it at the very beginning. 2020 was the hottest year on record. Cities are suffering the most from extreme heat. There's no way looking to the side of that issue. The outlook is not getting any better either, and we may well be on a track of plus 4 degrees if we don't get our act together. And that makes the action today so extremely urgent. And we heard from Kathy, extreme heat causes mental and physical exhaustion and greatly impacts our productivity and health. So it is really an important issue to tackle. And it means that we need to look at increasing resilience to extreme heat in the face of climate change, but we also need to improve on our present default approaches. And Rusha said it in his final words as well. And the mechanical cooling will not get us out of that. We will actually contribute on the opposite to heating up the planet because of the energy demand for mechanical cooling and the waste heat also from air conditioning, which increases the urban heat island effect. So that's really something we need to keep in mind, and we need to do better. And to break this vicious circle of heating and cooling, we need to reduce the need for mechanical cooling and prioritize low carbon alternatives when meeting the remaining needs. And obviously that has an impact on how we plan our cities, how we design our buildings, and to really have recourse to nature-based solutions. They have a key role to play. And we have heard amazing examples of what has been done, from the examples we heard with the green roofs in Madrid, the wind flows to cool neighborhoods in China, and the best practices and guidance through the green infrastructure framework in the UK. And that shows us it's vibrant. There is a lot that is happening, but we really need to get to scale. And we heard as well a number of critical barriers that are out there, and where we need to take a systems approach, where we need to actually build on the fact that the nature-based solutions do come with multiple benefits. We need to raise the awareness around that and share best practices on how to get it done, because obviously local context matters so much. So the more we learn from what has worked where and compare ourselves to that other situation, the better we will be getting and implementing it. This valorization, giving a real value to nature, and to see the green infrastructure as least as valuable as the gray infrastructure is really critical. And here we do need to do a bit more of the quantification job, both in terms of the benefits that we get on the environmental side, but also to monetize. And we heard it was said, it's hard to do, but it's not impossible. And we have some figures that start crystallizing out, and I think they're pretty compelling. And last but not least, it's super, super important that we ensure this collaboration, working together across the regions, across the sectors, so a better integration here, and across the levels of governance is so important. That's why also those platforms that we have with the Coalition and the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities are so key to facilitate the exchange and demonstrate what works. And And here I don't want to forget the point that was made by Councillor Sora on ensuring citizen involvement and long-term political support for these interventions, because obviously forests don't grow in one day. And with that, a quick outlook to the future. And I'm sorry, there's this phone that won't stop. That's the problem with working from home. Apologies. And an outlook to the future, has been working with the G20 presidency to put nature-based solutions further on the map. We will continue to do this work also by looking at the next presidency with Indonesia. You've learned from Rushad about the Coalition Handbook, and that will be a pillar in the work going forward. And we will put the topic very much on the agenda of the UN Environment Assembly, which will take place early next year, end of February, early March, and where we will have a session really around that topic as well. And we'll carry that through the entire year to raise further attention around it with the World Urban Forum and COP27 as well. And that we really hope to count on all of you to ensure that next year is indeed the year of nature. Together we can beat the heat, and we can make our cities greener, more sustainable, and more just. And maybe, back to the roots is not looking backwards, but it's a way forward. And with that, thank you very much for an exciting debate today. Thank you.